Hey guys, so this is going to be a finals game between Akshay Bhandarkar and Peter Moses. Akshay is from Bahrain, while Peter is from Nigeria. This is game 4 of the WESPA Championship. Both these players are fairly unknown to this point, at least on the world stage, but they're pretty solid and certainly deserve to be where they are. So let's get started. Peter Blootuu, and he decides to just exchange all of his tiles. I think that's reasonable. I think if you're going to exchange, I would probably exchange LT, but I actually prefer playing Bolt. I think Bolt is a little bit better. You're keeping OU, which isn't exactly an ideal leave, but you are scoring 20 points, and OU is probably only about minus 10 or so. So I think that Bolt is worth it, but I think it's perfectly reasonable also to exchange here. Akshay, DDDEEIN, and he ends up playing Denied. I think I prefer Eddie in the same spot a little bit. I think it's a little bit better of a play. You don't really want to leave the N, and more importantly, you don't want to leave parallels. Eddie does leave the E next to the double letter, but Denied leaves all sorts of parallels on top of Denied, along row 7 and row 9, and that's really problematic. Those are going to score a lot of points, and they're also going to get rid of a lot of tiles. Any sort of clunky rack that Peter might have, it's a lot easier to get rid of after Denied than after Eddied. So I think it's just a much stronger play. Peter AAAESWX, and he plays Wax. I think it's probably the best play. Normally I'd actually try to be getting rid of the duplicates, so I'd probably be looking for something like Awa. The problem with Awa is, again, the reparallels. Row 6 plays especially, but even row 9 plays. Just really, really easy to score a lot of points. And the X is a good tile for sure, but it's not that great on this board. So even though Wax keeps a worse lead, it keeps AAES, I think it's just a much stronger play. You know, you get to bingo more often, you get to fish for bingos more often, and it just makes it a lot more difficult for Akshay to score next turn. So, yeah, I think that's a good play. Akshay, ACDIIRU, so he's an A away from Aciduria. No real good scoring options here, there's no real good spots to score. He ends up playing Druidic. I think it's standard. There's just no other options here. Yeah, you're only scoring 22 points and you're keeping an A, but this isn't a very good board for scoring, so I think Druidic is about as good as you're going to do, and I don't think there's any other realistic options here. Peter, AAELSS blank, and he played Saladas. I think it's clearly the best play, scores them more than any other bingo, and it's somewhat defensive, it doesn't leave too many options back, so yeah, I think it's pretty good. And likewise, Akshay, ACIJOUY, plays Juco. Again, it's best. I don't think there's that many options here. Just take out the triple and score 45 points and try to keep pace. Peter, EEFLNRY, and a bunch of options here. I think they're all pretty similar. He ends up going with Flui. I think Flui's just fine. I think that Flay is fine, and I think actually a more unconventional option that's also fine is Furley. Furley might look a little bit weird because it scores less than the other two, and it actually blocks the D, which is a pretty good lane for you, but it also takes out the R, which is not a lane that you want to be using at all, and it also blocks the U. You actually want to keep that U for bingos on future turns. Actually works really well with E and R. And I guess even the J and row 10, both of which are not that useful, but at least a little bit useful for your rack. So I think that all plays are actually pretty close and pretty equal. But Peter went Fluid, scores the most points, can't really argue with that. Akshay, AEIMNVY, and he plays Maven pretty quickly, just scores so many points, and he actually earns an extra 5 points for our challenge here. If you don't know Maven for sure, you should definitely be challenging it. Peter, AENOQRT, and he plays Cat. He keeps ENOR, which is a perfectly good leave, but it's not that great on this board. There's really no good lines for it. I guess there's row 4, but that's kind of it. I actually prefer just slightly Trank, but I think you can definitely talk yourself into Cat as well. It's very unlikely that the Q is going to be used that often, and you can definitely have a U here, so some of the time actually might even block it and even sacrifice some points to do so. And yeah, EOR is not that much worse than ENOR because of the lack of bingo options, and I just think it's a slightly stronger play, mostly just because of the extra points. Akshay, AEEFGUZ, and he plays Fuse. I think you can consider Fuse Z in the same spot as well, but I think the best play is actually Fee in column A. scores a few extra points, and it keeps the Z as opposed to AGE. G is a really, really bad tile. You really don't want to keep it unless you have to. And the Z is one of the best tiles in the game. Besides the blank and the S, it's probably the third best play, or the third best tile in the entire game. So I think it's a stronger play. It also scores a few more points. So I would definitely be looking to play that instead. Peter, EENOORV, and he plays Overdone. Pretty standard, pretty easy to find, and no real alternatives. Akshay, ABEGIUW, and he plays Binaw. I think this is fine. I think it's really close between this and Gaw in column D. Binaw does a really good job of blocking the N and the E, which are useful for bingos and scoring, whereas Gaw has some overlaps. You could also play Gao, I guess, G-A-U, in the same spot. Problem with Binaw is, first of all, it leaves IU. IU is one of the worst leaves in all of Scrabble. It's just really, really anti-synergic. They don't go with each other very well, and there's no good spots for those tiles at all in this case. And even though it blocks the N and the E, it does leave this B open. Again, not that big of a deal. You know, you're not going to get too big of a score off column O or off row 1, but it still does leave something open there, so that's kind of a negative as well. I think it's really close between the two. I don't really have a strong preference. So I think Binaw is fine. LMORTTT, and Peter plays Mottos. Fine, you have 3 T's, so you get rid of the 2 T's and it scores far more than any other play here. Akshay, DIIOORU, and he plays Duo. Scores far more than any other play again. You could consider Orbi, I guess, on row 1, but I just wouldn't. You're just sacrificing too many points. You are keeping a better leave. IIOR is not a good leave, whereas Orbi is keeping OUD, which is a better leave, but it's just not big enough to sacrifice the points. The difference in leave just isn't that substantial. IIOR still does bingo some of the time. It still does score some of the time, so it's just not worth the sacrifice. And blocking that spot's just not that big of a deal. So I think Duo's perfectly fine as well. Peter, ABGHLRT, and he plays AH. Now, normally I'd be really hesitant to play H because you're keeping BGLRT, and you have no vowels, and there's no really good open vowels either, so it's pretty likely you're going to have to exchange next turn. Problem is that your alternatives are all just so bad in this position. I mean, you could play something that plays one more consonant off, but is that really that much better? I mean, you could play something like, I don't know, bag over here, but you're not really happy with that as an option. You could play ARGH, and yeah, that keeps a better leave. It scores 16 points. It leaves the H open, which is a really, really bad tile to leave open. ABLT doesn't do that well on this board. I guess you have an open E, but if you don't hit that, then what do you have? And there's no good bingo spots for any of that to play. There's just nothing of any immediate potential after ARGH. So taking the points immediately isn't bad. You can always exchange next turn. So I think it's fine. I think it's a really bad habit to get into, to start making plays like AH and leave 5 consonants on your rack with no immediate potential and no good immediate scoring spots. It's not exactly obvious what you can hit with any particular vowel either. Like if I draw an I or draw an E, I want to have something that I can play. And there really just isn't anything phenomenal to play with any of those tiles, but that being said, you don't really have any good alternatives, so I guess this is fine. But I say that with a lot of hesitancy. I don't think it's a play that I'm naturally in tune to make, but I think it's a perfectly fine play as well, even though it's not a play I necessarily make. Akshay, IINOORR, and plays Virion. I think it's fine. There's not really any good alternatives again. Alternatives are all kind of weak, so yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with this play as well. You're getting rid of as many tiles as you can and clearing off the duplicates off your rack, which is really important at this stage of the game. Peter, BGHLRTT. So this is kind of the nightmare I was talking about. He didn't draw a vowel, but luckily Akshay gave him some vowels to play through. So he ends up playing Broth. I think he's slightly better off playing Griff. BLT has some synergy, and I know that there's no real good place to play it, but it still is better than just keeping GLT. And the B is just a better tile than the G, especially on this board. G is just a really not great tile. I guess that there's some ING potential, maybe, but not really. There's no good places to play ING, and yeah, there's just more potential for other things to go wrong. And broth actually leaves a little bit more open because of the double letter score that's next to the H, which can combine with the H to hit the triple word, and it's just going to score a few more points. Something like photo, for example. So you don't really want to do that. You don't really want to leave that open. So I think Grith is just better just because of the extra points and the fact that it's a little bit more closed, even though it's not that much more closed. I guess the R through broth is also a little bit of a problem. So, yeah, for those reasons I prefer Grith just a little bit more than broth. Akshay, E-E-O-R-S-T blank, and he ends up playing theorems. Makes sense. I think all the bingos are pretty much equivalent here. Normally, I'd be a little bit more inclined with a lead to try to actually leave open a triple. Maybe play something like, I don't know, shoe tree or something like that. But it's a little bit risky because anytime that you use that triple, you're going to open up a lane yourself. So I don't think that's as big of a deal here as it usually would be. And you may not be far enough ahead to do that. Like, you know, you're going to be up 50, and a lot of the times your opponent's going to score like 40 to 45 up there, and there's enough bad draws that might not be ideal. But it's certainly not a terrible idea. The fact that there's a case S open is kind of a problem. So if there's a 5-letter play at 14J, and it leaves an S hook over there, and they have the S, that's kind of a problem. So I can understand why you might not want to do something like that. You'd rather play theorems instead. I think it's a minor point either way. You just want to make sure that you hit a bingo and that you don't want to leave too many bingos along row 14 in response. So I think theorems is just fine. Giklnot, and Peter goes with a Noki. Solid play for sure. You definitely want to add more bingo lanes. You're behind by 50, so you need to score something. Otherwise, there's a chance that Akshay will just outscore you entirely. So Noki does score decently, and it does keep column N open. But there are actually a lot of options here, and Noki's not just one of them. Although this is a good theme. This is the kind of play that you definitely want to be looking for in terms of the goals that you're trying to create. One of the things you always want to do is you always want to have goals in mind whenever you're playing, especially during the pre-end game. And you want to try to accomplish those goals. And this does at least a decent job of that. But like I said, there are other options. You might think that fishing with a K is okay, and I guess it kind of is. It hits a decent number of bingos, but a lot of them get blocked, so that's kind of not the best necessarily. You do have like toiling over here, for example, or trigonal over here, but that's just not enough. And most of the time your opponent's just going to play, actually just going to play through the S or something in column K, and that's just going to be too much of a problem. You don't have enough bingo lanes to try to outrun that. Another option is Toko up top. I think this is probably the best option that I can see anyway. It leaves the T open, it leaves some of the bingos on row 14, leaves the R open. Yeah, you are getting rid of the T, and you really do want to keep the T, but you're opening enough lanes, you're keeping a good enough leave, and you're keeping so many options such that it's very difficult for Akshay to attend to all of them at the same time, or create some sort of scoring line to outrun this. Outrun any bingo that you might draw. So I think that might be a little bit better, but I think that Inoki has the right theme going on. You also might think that Tronk is a reasonable option, but I don't really like Tronk very much. Tronk scores the most points, but it's really unlikely that you're going to score your way back into this game. You're going to be down 16 end turn, and it's just going to be really hard with 2 in the bag to actually outrun your opponent. You really need a bingo. So it's worth sacrificing a few points to try to make bingos more likely, and I think that accomplishes that. Same thing with Grok. Grok does keep a better leave, but ILNT is just not going to bingo very often on this board, and you need some spots, and you really want that R to stay open as well. So, yeah, I think that Toko is probably the best option, but I think that Inoki's probably like the second best option. It's certainly reasonable, and has a lot of good things going for it. But, yeah, I think Togo's just a little bit better. Akshay, Aeegilp, and he's up 16, and there are 2 tiles in the bag. Pool is AGILNPRST. So he has Epigil, doesn't play. And mostly you just want to try to hold on here, I think. Something like Prig, I think, is pretty standard. Just block the R, block the B, and hope he doesn't bingo down column N. But that being said, a lot of plays bingo to column N, so that's not that clearly great of an option. And they're all really easy to find as well. But you can't block both, and it's really hard to actually score. I mean, you could do something like Peg, I guess, but even that might not score enough. It's 16, so you're going to be up by 32. If you draw badly, it's over. And, obviously there's still plenty of bingos to the R. That's a problem. There's actually still bingos along column N when you play Peg. It doesn't even block that well. I guess you could play Pig instead, but that makes outscoring even more likely. Actually, it ends up playing GI. I am not a fan. I don't really know what you're trying to accomplish here. I think that if you're going to do something like that, you should play PI. PI is a lot stronger, mostly because of the fact that there's an R in the pool. And if Peter bingos, he's going to bingo to the R most of the time, and that's a lot of the ways that you're going to lose this game. But it's much harder for Peter to bingo if he has an R. So if he has an R, he's not going to bingo, and you're probably going to be fine. And if he doesn't have the R, then out of the two tiles in the bag, a lot of the time you're just going to draw a Parageal. And yeah, the P does leave some bingo lines open, but a lot of the bingos actually leave the N open. There's stuff like partings, or something that leaves stuff like algerine, potentially, with AEEGIL, or gelatine, or something like that. So I'm not so scared necessarily of leaving this P open. And a lot of the times you will outscore Peter, or Peter actually won't fish that much, because Peter's going to have a really hard time winning the game by fishing, especially when you fish out of a P. He's going to think that your rack is actually pretty strong here. It's going to look a lot stronger than the AEEGIL, so it's going to be a little bit hesitant to actually make some sort of scoring play, because he thinks he's just going to get outrun most of the time here. So, for example, if the S is still in the bag from his point of view, he's just going to fish. He's just going to think, well, that's the only way I can win the game. So I think that Pi is reasonable for sure. If you actually run a sim, I think it would actually win. Problem with Pi is that Peter can still fish, and maybe play a one in the back end game and fish that way. But he's going to be less likely to do that than normal, so I guess PI is okay. But I think I'd rather just play Prig. If you have a bingo, if he has a bingo, he has a bingo. There's nothing you can do about a lot of them. And many of the bingos that play at column N also play with the R, so yeah, there are a fair number of bingos, but you're screwed against those racks most of the time anyway. Unless you play the P off and draw the R and hit Parageal or something like that. Yeah, it's not that good of a position here, being up 16 with 2 in the bag. It looks a lot stronger than it is. You're probably only about 65% to win or something like that. You can play longer, but you're just going to give up more bingos, and you're not going to get outscored that often. So something like Grape. I mean, it's just no real reason to leave extra lines, although you're not really leaving extra lines. So just anything like that. They're all kind of the same. So yeah, I think I'd end up playing something just standard over here. But I could certainly see a case for me being made to play just the P off as well. I think it's definitely reasonable. But yeah, I don't really like leaving the G off on. I'm just not sure you're trying to hit here, and you're just going to get outrun a fair percentage of the time. And yeah, Peter, AGIL and ST, so he plays Rattlings. Game's over, pretty much. And actually just gives up, plays Pape, and yeah, Ray comes down, and Peter wins the game. So yeah, it's been game 4. I think it was a pretty interesting game. I think that there are a lot of little tiny points that may not be obvious to people that I hope are at least kind of interesting, kind of useful, and maybe a little bit more subtle and deep than a lot of people are used to in this sort of game. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any comments, feel free to leave a comment. I'll try to get back to you. And until next time, this is Kenji signing off.